Okay, welcome to English 3, Unit 2 Study Sheet video. I'm going to hurry right along here. Okay, we are going to have 3 questions on a sentence similar to this. One, the first question we're going to answer is if there's any clauses, what the clauses are, how many main clauses, how many subordinate clauses. We're going to address if there is a subordinate clause, what kind it is, and we are going to address if there are any verbals in the sentence, and if there are, what kind are they. So first of all, we're going to decide how many clauses are in this sentence. Remember, a clause contains a subject and a verb. If it's a main clause, it completes a thought. If it's a subordinate clause, then it is dependent on the rest of the sentence to make sense. Okay, so the main clause in this sentence is, our new house is the newest one on the block. So it has one main clause. So there's a lot other in there, which was the first one in our area built by metal framing. So we do have another part of the sentence that is a clause because it has a subject and a verb, but it does not state a complete thought. So this sentence has one main clause and one subordinate clause or dependent clause. The next thing we're going to look at is we do have a dependent clause. So what kind of clause is it? Which was the first one in our area built by metal framing? Is it an adjective clause? Is it an adverb clause? Is it a noun clause? Well, first of all, it's coming right behind a noun. Is this clause modifying house? Is it saying what kind of house? Our new house. Which was the first one in our area built by metal framing? So it appears that this clause is an adjective clause modifying a noun. So we have an adjective clause. The last thing we're going to address in this sentence is finding any verbals. Remember, verbals are words that look like verbs, but they're acting as something else, either an adjective or an adverb or a noun. And we have 3 kinds of verbals. There's participle, gerunds, and infinitives. Okay, first of all, participles have a suffix attached to them, and they are acting as adjectives. So do we see anything like that in this sentence? Well, I see the first one I see is the word built. It has a suffix on it, the letter T, formed from the word build, and it's coming right behind the noun and talking about that noun, which was the first one built in our area, which is a noun, and then built by metal framing. Built is talking about, actually it's talking about one, the first one. So it's still talking about a noun. So it's an adjective. So that makes it a participle. Then we have one more in here, framing. Looks like a verb, frame, to frame something, but it is acting as something else. It ends in ing. Okay, so that makes it either a participle or a gerund. But it is acting as a noun because you have a preposition here, and it's the last word in this prepositional phrase, by metal framing. So because it's acting as a noun, that makes it a gerund. So this sentence has a participle and a gerund in it. So in this sentence, we have one main and one subordinate clause, we have one adjective clause, and we have one participle and one gerund. We will be moving on to another sentence to identify some parts in it. Okay, we now have this sentence. Left the N off the when. Sorry about that. When the company began to give way to the merging corporation in the 1920s, one of the problems was personnel. On this sentence, we are going to have 2 questions here. First of all, we are going to decide if the subordinate clause in the sentence is, if there's none, or if it's a noun clause, adjective clause, or adverb clause. Note that on your study sheet, on the 3rd choice, it says school. That needs to be marked out, and you need to put problems there because that is a mistake that I made. All right, so we have, when the company began to give way to the merging corporation in the 1920s, one of the problems was personnel. Does this sentence have no subordinate clauses, A noun clause is a subject, an adjective clause modifying problems, or an adverb clause modifying was. Well, first of all, our subordinate clause is when the company began to give way to the merging corporation in the 1920s. That is telling you that your main clause, which is one of the problems was personnel, does not have to be the longest part of the sentence. In this case, the subordinate clause is bigger than the main clause, but that's not what's important. What's important is how it's acting, because even though this one has more words, it does not state a complete thought by itself. This part does. One of the problems was personnel. So we've got when the company began to give way to the merging corporation in the 1920s. The first clue of what kind of clause it is the word that it begins with, when, which it tells us, points us toward it being an adverb clause. Also, it is modifying the verb was here. This whole clause is modifying was. Okay? It tells it when it was. It was when the company began to give way to the merging corporation in the 1920s. It was. Tells us what the problems were. Okay? All right. So we have an adverb clause modifying was. Second of all, we're going to look for verbals in this sentence. Okay? So we have when the company began to give way. Okay. My first clue. One of the type of verbals is an infinitive. It's to plus a verb form. So here we've got a verbal. This is just the verbal itself, but this is the verbal phrase. Okay? In fact, the verbal phrase is all the way to the end of this, okay, because it all goes together. But the verbal itself is just to give. So we've got one infinitive. All right, do we see any other verb forms? I see one right here. Merging, because to merge is to put something together. So it looks like a verb, but it's not acting as a verb. It's actually modifying the word corporation. That makes it acting as an adjective, which makes it a participle. So in this sentence, we have an infinitive and a participle. Okay, we'll be moving on to another sentence. All right, here's our new sentence. It is not right to make a promise unless one is sure he can fulfill the promise. In this sentence, we're going to be finding how many clauses there are, what kind of clauses they are, and how many verbals are in the sentence and what kind. All right, it is not right to make a promise unless one is sure he can fulfill the promise. So, shorter sentence, but has a lot in it, okay? First of all, we have a main clause. We have the main clause, it is not right, okay? It is not right. That's the main clause. So that makes the rest of the sentence have to be something else. To make a promise, unless one is sure he can fulfill the promise. Okay? I'm going to tell you, I'll give you a little hint here. They eliminated a word that would tell you that there is another clause here, and that is the word that, which you can do. Okay? So pretend that that is right there. It is not right, okay, to make a promise unless one is sure that he can fulfill the promise. Okay, so we have the main clause, and then we have this, unless one is sure. Okay? That tells us about make. He can't make unless he is sure. So we've got one adverb clause. And then this is another clause, that he can fulfill the promise. Okay? So this is an adjective clause of what he is sure of. Okay? All right? And then we have one infinitive to make a promise. Okay? To plus a verb form. So one infinitive. Okay, so our new sentence here, our old automobile driven 100,000 miles was sold to a junk dealer. Okay? All right. In this sentence, we're going to identify the clauses that we have. Then we are also going to identify if there are any verbals in the sentence. So our old automobile, driven 100,000 miles, was sold to a junk dealer. Okay, at first glance, this may appear to have a subordinate clause in it because your main clause is our old automobile was sold to a junk dealer. But if you really look at this part that is set apart with commas, you'll see that it's not a clause because it doesn't have a subject and a verb. So what do we have here? What we have is a verbal phrase. So we only have then one main clause because your verbal phrase is part of your clause. It's just that it is a participial phrase because it's a verb form that has a suffix attached to it, and this whole phrase is modifying the word automobile. Automobile is a noun. This phrase is modifying automobile. That makes it an adjective, a participial, adverb, adjective, pardon me, an adjective participial phrase modifying automobile. Okay, we'll be moving on to the next sentence. Okay, now we have 3 sentences that have noun clauses in them, and we are going to figure out how each of these noun clauses are functioning in the sentence as direct objects or predicate nominatives or subjects. All right, so the first sentence here, the thief confessed that he had stolen the bricks from the site. Identified is our noun clause, that he had stolen the bricks from our site. This sentence is functioning as a direct object because it's following an action verb and receiving the action of the verb. The thief confessed. The thief confessed what? That he had stolen the bricks from the site. Therefore, the noun clause is acting as a direct object. The next sentence, the fresh air is what I like best about the farm. Okay? So how is this noun clause, what I like best about the farm, functioning in the sentence? The key is that it's coming toward the end of the sentence as a direct object noun clause is, but this one is following a linking verb. Remember, your linking verbs are am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been, is in that list. So this is not a direct object noun clause because if it was, it would have to follow an action verb as in the first sentence. But it follows a linking verb and it renames the subject, which is air. The fresh air is what I like best about the farm. What I like best about the farm is the fresh air. So it's renaming it, and the subject is talking about the same thing. Therefore, it is a predicate nominative, which follows linking verbs and renames the subject. The last sentence, whatever you tell me will remain our secret. The noun clause here is whatever you tell me. It is coming at the beginning of the sentence. When a noun clause comes at the beginning of the sentence, it is acting as a subject because the verb comes directly after it, will remain our secret. And so you have a noun clause in this last sentence acting as your subject. All right, we have 2 more sentences here, and these 2 sentences will be deciding what word is being modified by the adjective clause. The adjective clauses are now both underlined. Okay, so we have sentence 1. It's an adjective clause, and we got to decide what word is being modified. Our old automobile was donated to an organization that gave to a needy family. The clause is that gave to a needy family, talking about the word organization. What gave to a needy family? That represents organization. So the word being modified is organization in that sentence. The next sentence that has an adjective clause in it, the time for complaints about tax notices. Again, it left out the word that, okay? Okay, but that signals you that there's an adjective clause. It just is a relative pronoun that refers back to the word it's modifying. That you have received has already passed. They left out the word that, but if it was there, you would know that pronoun is talking about this word. This whole clause is talking about the word notices. What notices? The notices you have received. So the word being modified here is notices. The word that's being modified in the first sentence is organization. Both of these were adjective clause sentences that are modifying a word. Those are the words being modified. Okay, now we have two sentences that contain adverb clauses, and we have to decide what word that the adverb clause is modifying. First sentence, Gary plays the trombone better than he did last year. Our adverb clause is identified as than he did last year. What word is being modified here? What is than he did last year talking about? It is talking about the word better. Better than he did last year. So the word being modified here is better. Next sentence, unless we hear from you by June 1st, we will be forced to cancel the subscription that you have been receiving for years. The adverb clause in this sentence is unless we hear from you by June the 1st. Okay, so what is that modifying? Well, adverbs and adverb clauses have to modify verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs. So it can't be modifying a noun here. It can't be modifying we. But it's saying will be forced unless. So it's talking about the verb we will be forced, not we. Sorry, apologize. It's Monday. Will be forced, your verb. Okay, so the word that the adverb clause is modifying, the words, the verb phrase, will be forced. This sentence, Gary plays the trombone better. The word being modified is better. In this sentence, the word being modified is will be forced. The sentence here on the test, they're going to want to know if this is an adjective clause, has an adjective clause, noun clause, elliptical clause, or if it has no subordinate clause. Okay, on the sentence in your study sheet, these words right here are not there. Your sentence says, we like him as much as them. But what it's doing is it's taking out, repeating, we like. Instead of saying we like twice, they just eliminate those words. When they do that, this is called an elliptical clause. Okay, we're going to be going on to identifying relative pronouns and the noun or pronoun to which it relates. Okay, this sentence we're going to identify the relative pronoun that introduces the clause, and then we're going to find the noun or pronoun that it is renaming, referring to. Okay, so we have the clause that she sang. Okay, because the sentence is saying the beautiful song was very popular. So our adjective clause here that is beginning with a relative pronoun is that she sang. So our relative pronoun is that. Okay, and to what is it referring? It's what is that this is renaming or talking about? It is talking about the song. So our relative pronoun is that. Our noun or pronoun that it is renaming is song. Okay, this sentence also has the word that in it. So can we assume that that is beginning an adjective clause? She enjoyed that book by William Faulkner very much. For one thing, there's no word that it's referring back to. So just because it is the word that does not mean it's acting as a relative pronoun here. In this case, this is a demonstrative pronoun that's just referring to the word book. So there is no relative pronoun in this sentence because there is no adjective clause. She enjoyed that book by William Faulkner very much. There's no adjective clause that's referring back to anything. So there is therefore no relative pronoun. On the next section of your test, you will be memorizing your subordinating conjunctions. Those are the words that introduce adverb clauses. Be sure and study that list very well. I'm not going to cover that because it's listed in your study sheet, so you can study those yourself. In the next two sentences here, you're going to be asked to identify the underlined or italicized in your test word as a gerund or a participle. Remember, the gerunds act as nouns, participle act as adjectives. And they're both ending in ing here, which participles can end in ing, gerunds always end in ing. So we're going to have to decide this by how it's functioning in the sentence. The first sentence, by paying his bills promptly, the man had acquired a good credit rating. Okay, first of all, the first sentence, by, is key here because that is a preposition, making this a prepositional phrase. By paying, okay, by paying. Paying here is acting as a noun because it is a thing in this sentence. This is something that is a thing, by paying his bills promptly. Okay, and then here in the second sentence, so this word paying is acting as a gerund. The second sentence, wishing to remain anonymous, he asked the florist to deliver the flowers to the orphanage. This case, wishing to remain anonymous, he is the one wishing. He is a noun, pronoun actually, and this word is modifying that noun, talking about that noun. That makes this ing form a participle because participles act as adjectives, gerunds act as nouns. You will see on this next sentence that they have the choices. They are wanting you to find out if the sentence has two infinitives, an infinitive and a gerund, an infinitive and a participle, or two participles. I did not list all those choices here on my board, but let's read our sentence. She is flying to the Alaskan wilderness because she always wanted to learn about, I left out the word has. She has always wanted, forgive me for that. She has always wanted to learn about camping under extreme conditions. She is flying. Okay, so let's look for these verbals here, okay? Do we have any infinitives? Okay, now we have the word to here, but it's not acting as an infinitive because it'd have to be to plus a verb form. Okay, so do we have any other tos? Yes, down here, to learn. Is learn a verb form? Yes, it is. So we know we have one infinitive. Okay, let's see if we have any gerunds. She is flying to the Alaskan wilderness. Okay, here we have an ing word, right? Because gerunds end in ing. But in this case, it's just part of the verb. She is flying. Okay, so that is not a gerund. Do we have anything else that ends in ing? Yes, we do. We have camping. Is camping being used as a verb here? No, it is not, because this is a prepositional phrase about camping. Prepositional phrases end in nouns. So this word is acting as a gerund. Any other gerunds in this sentence? No, there is not. So far we have one infinitive and one gerund. Okay, do we have any participles? That would be a word that looks like a verb, but it ends in a suffix, but it is acting as an adjective. I see nothing here that does that. The only other verb form we have here is wanted, and it is acting as the verb in this clause. She has wanted, so that's a verb. So there are no other verbals in this sentence, so that makes us have one infinitive and one gerund. So this sentence has an infinitive and a gerund. We have one more and then we are done. they want to cover one more type of phrase. This sentence contains what is called an appositive phrase. Okay? It's a phrase because it does not have a noun and a verb in it. Remember, clauses have to have a noun and a verb. So it is just a phrase. But it is set apart with commas. That's one clue. And it comes right after a noun and talks about that noun. Okay, the difference between it and an adjective clause, of course, again, as I said, doesn't have a subject and a verb. It's just a little more material, a little more information about the word alpha here. So alpha, which is the subject of our sentence, and then it says the first letter in the Greek alphabet. Your first clue that you have an appositive phrase is that you have commas around it. Make sure that it's an appositive phrase and not a clause of some kind. So our appositive phrase in this sentence is the first letter in the Greek alphabet, all talking about alpha. And then it continues on with its thought, alpha is used in the Bible. But this just tells a little bit more about the word alpha. So it is an appositive phrase. I should have probably written that on there, but it is on your study sheet. That concludes our study sheet video for English 3, English 3 Unit 2. Be sure and study really well for this test. It is not an easy one, so make sure that you understand the material. I am available. If you have any questions, you can sure ask for me.